One night in Bangkok.
Imagine a skyscraper skyline by night, rainbows of neon and laser cutting tracks into the velvet darkness, shimmering half-light draping a city pregnant with possibilities. The soundscape blends a pulsing beat, a slight techno edge, with shouts and street noise, flares of laughter, intrigues of muttered conversations in dark corners. Wrap it in a tapestry of music woven from songs leaking from 100 clubs and cafes. Above you, the rumble of the sky train. Beneath your feet, the vibration of the MTR. Everywhere, there's the endless traffic noise, a city always moving. Tuk-tuks puttering, scooters scuttering, cars and trucks grinding their way through, hissing and honking like angry geese. This is no sleep city. In fact, it's hard to escape the reality, which is that, to quote the song, one night in Bangkok is worth a year in any other town. Or at least, that was how I planned to start this blog piece, using the metaphor of an exciting and exotic city as a rich source of stimulation of all the senses, a sea of sensation from which you can't escape, the ultimate inspirational bath in which to immerse yourself, one from which even the most reluctant Archimedes would find the urge to leap out and tell the world of his flash of insight. My plan was to use this device to report on the many insights that I took from the ISPIM conference, an innovation event which took place last week in Bangkok. Arguing that if one night in the city could have this effect, think what a few days could do in terms of offering a treasure trove of rich and stimulating innovation-linked experiences. Except that I got sidetracked, tripped up by a seemingly small detail, which turns out to have some interesting implications. I thought I ought to double-check the quote. I've often used it to describe the city, but I wanted to make sure that I had it correct, so I tried to trace it to its source. My memory was that it featured in a song from the 1980s musical Chess, co-written by Tim Rice, the lyricist for The Lion King, Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, so many other shows, and Benny Ulvaeus, who was one of the ABBA powerhouse team.
Only it turned out that no one
ever sang these words. They don't exist as a song lyric anywhere that I can trace. I made them up. Now, this doesn't turn me into a world-beating songwriter. Instead, it reflects something that we humans actually do a lot of. A phenomenon called confabulation. If AI did it, we'd probably call it out for hallucinating, making stuff up that seems to fit the situation. If I dig a little deeper into the origin of my lyric, it looks like it's a mashup. It's a remix of my memories triggered by a situation which called it into being. There is an very old 1975 song by 10cc called One Night in Paris, which comes close, with its chorus explaining that one night in Paris is worth a year in any other place. And Tim Rice did write a lyric in Chess which talks about one night in Bangkok, though he went on to talk about the sights and sounds you might hear and see. But my brain has somehow remixed them to create my own version, which thuds away with its own driving rhythm, feels very convincing, to the point where I'm sure I've heard the apt description of the situation that I wanted to capture on a warm evening in Thailand. I'm not alone. Confabulation is a widely reported phenomenon. People all over the world imagining that they heard or saw something that wasn't actually there. It's a consequence of the way our brains try to make sense of an impossibly complex external world. What the pioneering psychologist William James captured over a century ago when he called it
a blooming, buzzing confusion.
His description referred to how a baby first experiences the world, but it's not something we grow out of. And since there is so much happening out there which we can't make sense of, we utilize some generally helpful coping strategies. We've got a predictive mind, one which builds models of the world and then adapts around any unexpected changes or divergences from those models. Our brains are storytellers and sense makers. We impose a view of the information coming in, even if we get it wrong. Now, as a survival mechanism for helping us deal with an uncertain and volatile world, it clearly works. We're still around and thriving as a species. But it has some interesting side effects, one of which emerges when we draw upon our memories. We need to do this because our remembered knowledge of the world helps us deal with it. That process of remembering is itself a kind of storytelling, bringing back to life what we think we learned from earlier experience. And if there's a detail missing, our storytelling brains will helpfully fabricate one to fit. Confabulation. Now, there are plenty of examples. A whole library of websites specializing in correcting us over misquotations, and it helps to remind us that this is a common experience. For example, Ingrid Bergman in the film Casablanca never actually said the line, "Play it again, Sam," while she was draped over a piano in Rick's bar. "Beam me up, Scotty," is a phrase which never actually rang across the flight deck of the Starship Enterprise in the Star Trek film. And the Wicked Queen in Snow White never actually addressed the mirror, mirror on the wall. She was actually asking the magic mirror on the wall who was the fairest of them all. It's not just song lyrics and misremembered quotations. We're pretty good at hallucinating all kinds of memories. In her detailed study in 2009 of confabulation, Fiona Broome used the term the Mandela Effect to describe the situation, where many people share a specific, detailed memory of an event or fact that never actually happened. She named it after Nelson Mandela, when she discovered that she and thousands of others had a distinct memory of Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. They remembered the news coverage, the funeral, the riots which followed. Of course, in reality, Mandela was released in 1990, became president of South Africa, and lived until 2013. Now, sometimes confabulation is a simple attempt to make sense of misheard incoming information, a version of the old party game of Chinese whispers, in which we hear something and we pass on what we think we heard. As long as it makes sense to us, we'll believe in it, and eventually it becomes real. Apparently, Mondegreen is the technical term for all those misheard lyrics. Like when Jimi Hendrix asks us to "excuse me while I kiss this guy" in the middle of singing Purple Haze. In fact, the term Mondegreen was created by the writer Sylvia Wright back in 1954. She reported on how she misheard the Scottish ballad "The Bonnie Earl o' Moray." She always thought that the ballad said, "They've slain the Earl of Moray and Lady Mondegreen." The correct lyrics are, in fact, "They've slain the Earl of Moray and laid him on the green." So, confabulation and its cousins are common human characteristics with some amusing consequences. But perhaps it's also something which might have relevance in the wider world of innovation. because although it might be a hallucination, it represents an interesting point of creative departure. After all, we're remixing to create something which has value to us in terms of helping make sense of our world. What if we use this same principle in our quest to create something new? Innovation. Well, it turns out that innovation by mash-up, by remixing, even if it's accidentally triggered, has a long and glorious history. Think about the world of music and the ways in which the mash-up has entered the composer's conscious vocabulary, remixing old and valued snatches with new lines and melodies, new and surprising backdrops. Back in 1979, the Sugar Hill Gang had a hit with Rapper's Delight, which was an infectious club banger which spilled over to wider popular acclaim. Now that took the foundation of Bernie Edwards' wonderful bass line from Chic's Good Times and superimposed a hip-hop storyline, creating what's generally regarded as the first example of rap music to receive widespread radio airplay. Now their innovation drew in turn on an earlier tradition. Recombinant music of this kind was alive and well 20 years before in the clubs of downtown Kingston in the emerging Jamaican reggae scene. Producers would take the rhythm, the instrumental backing track of a hit song, and then allow different vocalists to record entirely new songs over it. Engineers like King Tubby and Lee Scratch Perry began disassembling tracks, stripping away the vocals, adding echoes, delays, all sorts of other effects. They weren't creating new notes, they were recombining existing ones into a phantom version of the original. Now, by the 1990s, sampling and remixing had become mainstream. Vanilla Ice built his huge success Ice Baby on the firm foundations of a bass riff originally created by David Bowie and Queen a decade earlier in Under Pressure. Now these days the mashup's an accepted core element in music. Artists beg, borrow, or sometimes steal in their quest to create something new and memorable. Remixing creates something more as well as different, arguably switching our brains to remember the original superimposed on the new. It's also spawned a whole category of lawsuits. Songwriters like Ed Sheeran seem to spend an increasing amount of time in law courts rather than the studio, defending the accusation that they've stolen elements of songs originally created by others. Now, Shearer's in good company. Bob Dylan, Led Zeppelin, George Harrison, hundreds of others have also been in that particular dock. A key part of Sheeran's defence is that there's only so many musical notes available, and stringing them together in his particular way may unconsciously draw on earlier templates. Confabulation. Now, at a neuropsychological level, this remixing is part of a bigger suite of ways in which our brains forge connections, creating new ideas from the fusion of different neural pathways. Think about the many examples where inspiration has come through unexpected connections. For example, Percy Shaw's observation of the reflection in a cat's eye when he was driving at night led to the development of one of the world's most widely used road safety innovations. Or Georges de Mestral on a walk in the Swiss Alps and noticing the way plant burrs became attached to his dog's fur, and developing from that inspiration the highly successful Velcro fastener. Wandering around Chicago in 1912, William Clan was a man on a mission. He was part of a team set up to explore ways in which they could reduce the costs of manufacturing a car to fulfill Henry Ford's vision of a motor car for the great multitude. Now, they'd already developed many of the ideas behind mass production: standardized and interchangeable parts, short task cycle work, specialist machinery. But what Clan saw while walking past the Swift Meatpacking Company's factory gave him an insight into a key piece of the puzzle. Because he saw the workers were effectively disassembling meat carcasses, stripping off various joints and cuts as the animals were led past them on a moving overhead conveyor. In a classic moment of insight, he saw the possibility of reversing this process. And within a short space of time, the Ford factory boasted the world's first moving assembly line. Not that those meat packers had invented something new. Way back in the early 16th century, the Venetians had already developed an impressive line in mobile assembly. They moved ships along canals in order to fit them out for battle. And they were able to produce, arm and provision a new gallery at the rate of 1 per day. 40 years after William Clown, the McDonald brothers began applying Ford's assembly line techniques to making hamburgers. The rest is fast food history, with the company now selling more than 75 hamburgers every second and feeding 68 million people every day. A little later, in the 1970s, and in another part of the world, Dr. Govindappa Venkataswamy retired. He'd worked for many years as head of ophthalmology in the main hospital in Madurai in India, and decided to use his expertise and his newfound free time to try and help prevent blindness in rural communities in his home state of Tamil Nadu. This was not an insignificant problem. While the treatment for cataracts itself is well developed, it comes at a price. In an Indian hospital, the cost works out around $300 per operation. And in a country where most people, especially in rural environments, earn less than $2 a day, that price tag puts treatment for cataracts way out of reach. So in order to achieve his dream, he had to search outside the conventional health sector, seeking ideas from other worlds with similar challenges. Specifically, he was looking for low-cost ways of carrying out activities systematically, reproducibly, and to a high-quality standard. He found his inspiration under McDonald's golden arches. He saw the underlying similarities in the core processes they used and adapted their principles of assembly line manufacturing to the context of eye surgery. Developing and refining what became known as the Aravind system has meant that the average cost of a cataract operation is now below $25. This isn't done by compromising on quality. Aravind's got better performance than many Western hospitals. It's become the world's largest and most productive eye care service group, responsible for treating over 35 million patients with its low-cost, high-quality model. Now, what all those stories have in common is that they're working on the same problem, but in a different context. And this is, as we know, a powerful resource in innovation. Answers don't always have to be new to the world. They can also be adapted from different contexts. But the process is often accidental, like the flashes of inspiration experienced by William Clown or Dr. Venkataswamy, where they superimposed their problem on what they were seeing in a different world. It can also be part of a deliberate innovation strategy. It's what Ramon Vullens calls remixing across different worlds, exploring and finding new insights from bridging them. Significantly, he calls the brokerage role he plays as one of being an idea DJ. Andrew Hargaden wrote extensively about this in his book, exploring how breakthrough innovations often happen. It's what he calls recombinant innovation, and it occurs at that collision point between two different worlds. We also like to think of innovation as a conscious process, not least because that allows us to develop practices and structures to replicate it. But the reality is that those neural processes which operate, especially at the front end of ideation, are often far from conscious. Not least, there's a long tradition which recognizes that some of the best ideas come to people in dreams and other trance-like states. Essentially, conditions under which surprising neural connections can be made because the brain is operating in different modes. For example, and famously, the 19th century chemist Friedrich Kekulé is credited with having unraveled one of the keys to the development of organic chemistry, the structure of the benzene ring.
This arrangement of atoms is central to understanding how a vast range of things, from medicines to fertilizers, explosives, all sorts of things,
depend on the benzene ring. It's enabled the acceleration of growth in the field. Now, Kekulé, having wrestled for a long period with the problem, eventually had the flash of inspiration, bing, when he woke from a dream where he'd seen the atoms dance and then, like a snake, begin eating its own tail. Now, this weird dream picture nudged him towards the key insight that the atoms in benzene were arranged in a ring. And so modern organic chemistry was born. The psychologist Graham Wallace first outlined a model to explain this aspect of the creative process
100 years ago.
His theory stressed the role of incubation, a process of exploration often taking place when the mind is occupied elsewhere or unconscious. The theory still holds and speaks to the core of how we make new neural connections. We don't stop working on problems when we consciously switch off. The search continues to run in the background under conditions where there's much more freedom for our neurons to play. We're back to our brains as active storytellers and connectors. Now, this is a fascinating observation, but the challenge it raises is practical. If creativity depends on novel connections, then can we deploy techniques and heuristics to help us do so when we're awake? The answer appears to be positive, and there are a whole range of tools and techniques available predicated on this idea of enabling remixing recombination. For example, Edward de Bono's random juxtaposition deliberately brings a random stimulus together with the problem we're concerned with and invites us to force fit a connection between the two. Logically, there isn't one, but the collisions which occur can often lead to new insights and novel pathways for further thinking. So, remixing matters in innovation, and it suggests that it would pay us to allow time, space, and more than a little suspension of normal thinking service to allow these mashups to occur. So maybe a recipe for innovation success is simply sit back, relax, switch off, and let those neurons connect.